women and youth. And I think we are well aware that our women are largely, of course, very much involved in agri-food systems in this continent, actually up to 2/3. And that is also not with challenges in as much as they are either involved as farmers, sometimes they're involved as agro-dealers, they are also involved as educators, and so much they're doing within the food systems. But again, we really have to interrogate that, whether they are also getting as much from the same food systems where they seriously and of course serve. And of course the youth bulge in this continent, how much are we taking advantage of the demographics to be able to really create more opportunities for young people, either in terms of just employment opportunities within the agri-food systems, also looking at even now the technology, because a lot of our governments now are putting a lot of investments and looking at digital space, including automation of our processes, looking at issues like artificial intelligence, and so much is already going into that space. But our young people also are involved in the process. So there's so much we're going to hear from our panelists, and I'm very sure that at least we will be able to tap into something that can help even in our engagements when we get back home. So at this point, I would want to invite my panelists to come on stage to really help us just be able to converse on these particular issues. To one of the first panelists I will invite on stage is Ndindi Nuneli, is our Sahel consultant, that has also been working in the food system space for very long time. I would want to invite you to come on stage. Glad for her, and thank you so much and welcome. Next speaker will be Dr. Apollos Noafo, who is also Agra Vice President, and of course a lot of work that he's doing in the policy space. And then we'll also can clap for him. Then we have Tanaja, we have Maureen Munjua, who is working for Tanaja. Welcome, colleagues. And as I said, we have 2 panels in this session, so we'll do the first segment, and of course thereafter we'll be able to also continue the next section. So welcome, and we look forward to the conversation. So I will start with Maureen, and I hope you've settled, and basically, you're looking forward to the day, and here you are. So basically looking at food systems, and of course the whole discussion around equity for our youth and women, how do you really look at that space? And of course you'll also be able to borrow into some of the work that you guys do as an institution. So basically in that particular space, let us just be able to really hear from you how you look at the whole ecosystem, but basically also experiences from Tanaja. Over.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you for this opportunity today. My name is Maureen Munjua. I am the country representative of Tanaja, which is a development agency working around advancing gender equality and improving nutrition within agriculture investments. So we largely support African institutions and building their systems and structures to be able to address gender equality. I think in light of the question and the discussion today, and I think around this week, I think the statistics are clear. We cannot move forward as business as usual. I think the business case for involving women, the business case for involving young people as we are thinking about food systems transformation is really evident. And I think the question we've always asked is then what is actually stopping us from doing this as a continent, as stakeholders that are actually investing in the sector. As Tanaja, we've had the conversation with institutions that we work with, and we have asked, how can we help? What is stopping you as an institution to actually really think about women as central in your work, as central in what you measure, as central in how you design your programs, or youth as well. And what we've clearly had is also that, we know we need to, but we don't know how to. And it begs the question of how are institutions being supported to actually address the issues around gender equality, around inclusion of women, around inclusion of youth. We've also had, we are doing it, but we actually are not really able to actually tangibly talk about it. I was sitting in the audience this morning, and there's a program that's really doing great work, and it's a pay for results project. But when you ask about how much of that pay for results is actually tied to gender indicators, and they were like, we don't tie it to gender indicators as long as they're improving productivity, as long as they're selling their inputs. So there's missed opportunities that we are seeing when we're having the conversations with institutions that we are supporting on how do you help us develop strategies to actually guide our own business or our own programs to really be intentional about including women and youth at the beginning of design or within business models. I think it's very interesting that when you're starting a business, you will do a market analysis. But you wouldn't do a market analysis with a lens of what does my female customer want vis-a-vis what does my male customer want? What is attractive for the young people that are potentially your customer base? When you're doing baselines as NGOs, you will look at baseline data from a productivity perspective, but not really necessarily looking at how is this intervention going to look differently. If you're rolling out an extension program, how is that going to look differently for women farmers or women development agents or extension agents vis-a-vis their counterparts in the same space? So really bringing those voices, really bringing those preferences to the design of products and services. We are working with a lot of microfinance institutions in West Africa. And the question has been, do you know your customer from a sense of how do your male customers perceive your products, how do your female customers perceive your products, and how are you innovating that product development and product offering to your clients. We are also really thinking and pushing institutions to really be accountable. It's nice to say that, yes, we care about women, we care about youth, but really being able to actually demonstrate that in what your boards look like and your leadership structures, what your staffing structures look like, part of your budgets, what roles do women and men play? We don't do we don't do a lot in the space of pay gaps, but that's really a critical space where other institutions are, of course, intervening. But really critically as institutions looking at these areas is important as we are doing business. But also, what does your data tell you? It's good to get to sex disaggregated data for especially programs if you're doing interventions or really even just your products as private sector companies. But how do you use the insights from that data to actually innovate backwards and say, okay, if we are really missing a critical gap of our customers, how are we thinking about our product? How are we thinking about our distribution differently? So really thinking about these key nodes at institutional structures, but also building the capacity of the staff, building the capacity of your systems and your structures to actually be able to support this decision making with data that guides how you design, how you innovate about programs, how you innovate around your own distribution systems.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Maureen. I think that's quite elaborate. Yeah, just listening to you, delve deep into looking at institutions and how their frameworks, the systems have been set, and how much of that is, very much alive to the issues around the women and even the youth. Just going beyond just the rhetorics to really more of very tangible and empirical sort of focus to really deliver what they have committed to. So I would jump straight to Dr. Harpoulos. I know policy, because Maureen seems to have actually looked into a couple of issues, from trade, looking at the farming systems. She's touched on different issues that affect women and young people. And it would be interesting just to hear even from your experience and perhaps also really informing us from the policy, standpoint, especially at the macro, micro level. How do you really, put all this together in a way that is more progressive to be able to really realize some of the challenges, address some of the challenges that Maureen has talked to? Maybe we'll hand it over to you before I come to our next panelist. Sure. Yeah.
Is it working? Yeah?
Yes.
It is. Okay, great, thanks. I think she's sort of addressed or sort of, described those challenges very well, and thank you for that. I think what we need to consider is the fact that, if we want to be real about, including women and youth, we need to think about first what the enabling environment looks like. Yeah. So for example, we know that less than 10% of our youth own land. I used to work on land policy when I worked with, with Oxfam International. And one of the things I saw is that practically every policy on land within the continent is very controversial. You touch it and then you get a phone call sometime in the evening while you're having dinner and say, look, you need to rethink what you just proposed this afternoon at the meeting, right? And that's because you're pushing for women in particular. So one of the things we found was that women don't have land. And the reason why they don't have land is because of very fundamental cultural issues that have, found their way into national policies and regulations. They were not there before, but because of culture. So those who make the policies bring a cultural lens to it, and then it becomes law, and becomes regulation, it becomes an act of parliament, it becomes a problem, both for youth and for women. I think if we think about it from the lens of trying to drive an inclusive food systems that supports youth and women, then we need to rethink what the enabling environment looks like. First, we need to understand the fact that as much as it might be easy to write these things from a legal perspective, and I say that from my experience, taking a political economy approach remains important. And what that means is that we need to consider the context within which those policies and regulations need to be made, and how that impacts on the broader economy. So for instance, I know in a country where we were looking at, allowing women at the community level to have land because they were women smallholder farmers. One of the things we found was that it was more like a taboo, for women to own land, because what it meant. But we discovered that a father could allocate land to his son, even if he was just 9 months old, as long as he was a boy, right? So what did we do? We looked at that and went back to the policies, discussed with the parliamentarians, and decided to make some changes. Of course, there was a pushback from the chiefs, from the local traditional rulers around that. But we had to, use data. And one of the things that supports the enabling environment is data. So there needs to be a shift, from some of these decisions that are culture sensitive or culture influenced to data-driven decisions, because that's the answer. And of course, don't expect that everybody will appreciate data, but it takes some time. But making sure that we have data-driven decisions that reflect, inclusion, that reflect youth and women is important. Second is the fact that, we need to think about the fact that I will define that policies, are not just what becomes an act of parliament. They need to be financed. You need to finance a policy. And if you want to consider it from the perspective of the fact that budgets are policy priorities expressed in figures, then you then need to consider how we prioritize those policies. And prioritizing those policies, again, I'll still go back to political economy, but I'll go back to the fact that, you want to consider where the investments are going to come from and what sort of data supports the investment planning. And this means that we need to rethink, the institutions and what sort of tools they use in planning and policy proposals. So you get to an institution and they are using statistics that is 20 years ago, and you're wondering, so how did you abide by this? They said, well, we used mental average rates to increase the percentage. And I'm like, you don't do that. You need to do continuous research. So there's a lack of investment in research, and that's actually, putting a skewed decision that, negatively impacts from our women smallholder farmers to our youth, And then related to that is the fact that there have been a lot of financial instruments, that were developed to support youth and women to access, finance for agricultural transformation. But you know why they died? About 66 of them. They died because there was no policy or regulation to back up those financing instruments. And the banks just said, no, we're not touching this because this is going to put our monies at risk, So there needs to be, that financing instrument that can be backed by policies and laws. And, some of these financial instruments were then taken to Asia, to countries like Vietnam and the others. And they worked because there was a clear, ambition to drive transformation and to ensure that, young people could access, a financing for agricultural programs or to even finance their businesses. A third is the fact that we need to look at the capacity. What sort of policies are going to support capacity development or strengthening? And that's also linked to institutions. So, for example, you get into an institution, and the kind of expertise you're looking for, the right capacities are not there, but they are in the environment. And that's because, for example, within the civil service, there's a certain limit of remuneration you can offer because you need to make sure that you're looking at fairness and equity. But at the same time, that amount of salary that is being paid by governments cannot fund the experts. So one of the things we're learning is, look, you put in, you put in sort of like a transformation office, put in youth experts, put in gender experts, and you're paying them. I'll tell you this, in a country where we did some of that, the permanent secretary and the minister came back to us and said, look, you're disrupting the civil service, right? We said, but this expertise is lacking in the Ministry of Agriculture, is lacking in the National Statistics Office, it's lacking in the presidency. They said, well, let's use our civil servants. But we said, if you pay them this amount of money, no one is going to do this work because the expertise is not there. So creating a balance, is that important. So what did we do? We wrote a proposal, that became an act of parliament such that this set of experts were then employed specially, what you call the Special Executive Service. And they were not allowed to, be that long in the civil service, but there was a rule that they must transfer that capacity within the civil service. So part of their work for 3-year period, very clear end-to-end contracts, was that you go in, a civil servant is attached to you to be able to learn from you, and you're able to transfer that capacity within a 3-year period before you leave. It worked in some places, in others, less. But as we continue to refine some of these things, we need to understand that, some of these inclusion agenda are critical, and having the right capacity to drive that agenda, particularly for youth and women, remains important. Finally, before I stop, is the fact that, we looked at innovations. So one of the things we said is we're not going to play with land policies because they're very sensitive, but we rather we are now looking at what is called land marketing. That means, how do we ensure that women or youth have access to land through a land marketing policy? So you're going to say, look, here's how we market this land. We market this land for the next 4 years because you're not using it, and then in that way, we're doing it in such a way that because you're not using it and you still want to make money from it, or you want to ensure that you're preserving your ancestral ownership, whatever the case may be, there's some incentive so that it can be used for agriculture, used for farming. It becomes business for these women, and they're able to ensure that they break even and make profits. So it involves the banks, it involves probably in some cases the microfinance institutions, because the commercial banks are big and they only lend to very high-end commercial farmers. But these are for the purpose of smallholder farmers, particularly smallholder women farmers, who can then lease the land at very little, because it's backed by government, but it's also backed by an act of parliament. And then they're able to grow their businesses, increase productivity, and contribute to closing out on food insecurity in the country. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Apollos. I can feel the passion. Basically looking at the whole enabling environment, which then the way you paint it means that really there's still some work that needs to be done. As of course looking at the financing instruments and basically a capacity to the political economy of most of our countries. I think it's still an issue. But I will come straight to Ndindi, and I think the conversation is about transforming Africa's food systems. And I think this conversation is not starting here today. It's been on, and a lot of these issues, I think I consider them existential because they've been there before. The conversation has been ongoing. But then we'd really want to hear some of the very bold steps that we really need to really take as a continent if we are to take this seriously. Because the issue of youth, sometimes it's going beyond just like an age cohort to a more serious conversation. Like, it's not just an age cohort that people pass through, but we really want to see how young people are going to be included in the food systems in terms of transforming how things are happening. So basically, like, looking at your experience and of course the listening conversation, what should we be able to really go with as the take home from this particular conversation? Yeah, over.
Thank you so much. So a lot has been said by my two dynamic colleagues on the panel, and I'm going to just present 4 ideas from my lived experience in the sector. So I wear a number of hats as an entrepreneur, as a consultant, and civil society engagements as well. So what we noticed early on in the sector was the lack of skills among our young people and the lack of interest. So being the naive person I am, when I entered the sector, I said, let me go and speak to the university's commission. We need to change our curriculum because agriculture is being taught as a science, not as a business. I came up with a great proposal, and unfortunately still hasn't been implemented till today. But what you see across Africa is a cake approach to getting young people excited about this sector. In primary school, there actually is agriculture. In secondary school, there's agriculture, but it is taught as a science. And my children who went to school in Nigeria still were being given hoe and cutlass and boots. We had to buy boots and overalls for them to learn agriculture, which doesn't make anyone interested in the sector. So what we did at Sahel Consulting was we started the Sahel Scholars Program, where we actually go to universities and we have a session with the students and with the professors to basically introduce them to 21st century food ecosystems. In fact, calling it agricultural science, agricultural economics is so limited today. We have to change the language, we have to change the curriculum. I know that about 6 years ago or 7 years ago, Gates Foundation actually pulled together the business schools across Africa to try to come up with a curriculum that was then going to be adopted. Gibbs, Swarthmore in Kenya, Lagos Business School, I think GIMPA. But unfortunately, it's landed in these schools more as an executive education program, but hasn't filtered in through. So my first appeal to all of us working in the sector is we need talent for the sector. We need talent that is relevant, that is up to date, and that's capable. But we also need to have ways to attract our young people. So I have pushed for every business school in Africa to have an agri-food ecosystem course. Even if it's a 2-week course, that's mandatory because ag economies depend on this sector, and yet we don't have talent interested in the sector. So beyond the Sahel Scholars Program, we provide internships and support for the professors to actually understand what is required. And we need funders and government to come alongside us because you start seeing light bulbs go off in the students' minds. When you start off the session, you say, how many of you have fathers who are farmers or mothers? Nobody wants to raise their hand. They're literally ashamed. But by the time you show them successful professionals and entrepreneurs who are in food, they're all, oh, I want an internship, right? And it changes their mindset. And now they're actually proud to be in the sector. So I think we really need cross-sector collaborations because talent is the biggest bottleneck. For all the companies I've started, our growth is limited by talent in the sector. And I'm training for the sector because everybody comes to us to poach staff after we've trained them, right? Because you're teaching them about food systems. And I've actually told our HR teams to create curriculum. Let's actually start training for the sector so that people can actually come and poach our staff. So that's one. And partnerships are key. And that's why I bring in Ignite. So we've actually benefited from Ignite's training to have a gender lens in our work. And this was forced on us by a funder, which is BMGF. Because when they told us you have to work with Ignite, we're like, please, what do they know that we don't know? Right? Why should they be looking at our work? But I have to tell you that having expertise on the continent and having that expertise being compelled to partner with others is actually a win-win strategy. And we shouldn't be ashamed or feel bad that GAIN is in the room. What does GAIN have to offer? Let's learn nutrition from GAIN. AGRA is in the room. Ignite is in the room. And what can we as Africans teach each other? So for me, I think that's critical. And we need the curriculum change. We need the policy change around curriculum. And we need public-private partnerships to make the young people excited, engaged, and ready to take on the challenges. So that's from the youth education perspective. Now, from the SME perspective, we have some serious gaps, especially around vocational training for our young people. We're still highly dependent on China, on Europe for equipment to process food in Africa. And our young people don't have the skills. And I know we've talked a lot about vocational skills, but really our institutions that are focused in Nigeria, it's FIRO, it's the Federal Institute of Industrial, I'm sure you have them in your countries. When you go there, they're focused on tractors and harvesters, which while those are important, processing is where we have serious gaps, and we're not making any strides in that. And when a machine breaks down at Ace Foods, a company that I co-founded, we have to wait for 2 weeks for someone to come from China to fix it. That is ridiculous for a country the size of Nigeria. And so we need to do a lot more around skill training for our young people who are unemployed around vocational skills on basic machine equipment and machine support. And I don't see anybody filling that gap. And for me, that's a very important gap. Yesterday, we went to a part of Tanzania, and we saw, 2 SMEs. And I saw how they were falsifying their flour. And they didn't have microdosers. They didn't have premixes. It was really basic. And I said, where are the partnerships for this? We're so advanced in years in some places, and in other places we're still behind. So how can we institutionalize this knowledge, and how can we scale it? For me, that's really critical to get young people excited, because the hoe and cutlass days are over. There is money to be made in mechanization and equipment leasing, equipment repair. How can we bring that back to our countries? And then the third thing when it comes to SMEs is gender. So I serve on some global and local boards. And when I first joined the board of Nestle and Heineken Nigeria, I noticed that the percentage of women was so low. And I said, why? And they said, there's a law in Nigeria that says women can't work overnight unless you're in hotels or nursing. Now, come on. So I looked up the law, and it's true. So the labor agencies will penalize the multinationals for having women work overnight in factories. And those of you who are in manufacturing know that the way to move up in manufacturing is actually from the factory floor. You don't move up from HR into CEO roles. You don't move up, really, honestly. And so I realized this was an issue, and I said, I know in 1960 you decided whether women should be at home or not, but if women can work at hotels, please, they should be able to work in factories. So today, that law hasn't changed, and I've raised it repeatedly. And guess what? People continue to make decisions for women on career choice. And it should be a woman's decision whether she wants to work overnight in a factory or hotel or as a flight attendant or a nurse, whoever she wants to be. And so when we see these policies, we don't actually address them in manufacturing. And really, food systems is food manufacturing. If we're moving up the trajectory from fresh food to processed food that's healthy and nutritious, we need to look at those laws. So I think, so the points that have been made, I think we're very narrowly focused in this sector on farmers and farmer policy. And I love that you're focusing on land. But trust me, if you get women involved in manufacturing, they will ensure that more women, as women farmers, are providing the food, and that will then foster ownership of land. But if you're focused on the lowest of the, we need demand, efforts at both ends. But I often see that we're very focused on land policy, which is important, and we forget manufacturing policy. I'm just using that as an example. And then finally, as I think about gender equity and youth engagement in food ecosystems in Africa, I continue to be frustrated that we keep on hearing from the same voices. And that's why through African Food Changemakers, I created the Leading Women in Food Fellowship. And I'm proud to say that I brought 22 women to AGRF. And why did I make that effort? Because I felt we need to hear unusual voices. This is a reunion for many of us. We've seen each other many times this year. But let's get other voices on the table. Let some of us retire from the stage. And let's pull up other women. And for the last 6 months, what we've been doing is exposing these women to each other, building a community of support. But I said, instead of creating an alternative platform, let them come to AGRF and meet all of you. And I think we need to support more platforms like that, providing data, funding, networks, connections, and a community of support to women, and getting out of the way for the younger women to take over. And I'm doing that practically through the Leading Women in Food Fellowship, and we need all of your support to create more of those entities and to partner across the board to change the narrative. Thank you very much.
Great, Ndindi. Thank you so much. I think that's really important, just listening to the kind of change you want to see. And of course, as you mentioned very well, I think partnerships are going to be very key as we go forward, and also going beyond the traditional, land issues, more into manufacturing and the role of women and all that. And I think that's now, it's a challenge to all of us. So I think, as I said earlier, we still have the panelists with us because we have the next session coming in. Feel free to also get more details, because I believe there's so much we really need to tap into, so that then we be able to really move from where we are at the moment to the next stage where we want to. So at this point, I would want to invite you, Hassan, to really take over. But can we give a clap to our colleagues here, the panelists, who have done us very proud, and we are happy to have you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much, Charles, for doing such a great job. Thank you to our able panelists. I think they've left us with a lot of questions. This session was designed a little bit different. We wanted to actually have a debate here, getting real. Are we talking inclusion, or is it really happening on the ground? So we put together a very exciting panel for all of you, and I'll call them up one by one. They will have a chance to introduce themselves in more detail. But for now, I'll just call them up so we can get this show on the road. Wangari, is Wangari here for Farmer on Fire? Please join us here. Yeah, she is here. Winnie, Osula, Rebecca, and Ruth, and Tim. So this is an almost all women's panel, almost. Maybe I should take the center seat, because this is a debate after all. Let me moderate it from the center. Yes, so thank you all for being part of this panel. I will ask that you say a little bit about yourself as you take up to answer the question that's being asked. It's really just one question. We're getting real. Is this a mirage, or is it a reality? You heard from the panelists earlier on about the key issues that dog the sector. I looked at some statistics, and I found that in terms of access to finance, there's less than 10% women and youth that actually get money for the ag sector. less. And these are people who make up to 70% of the continent. In terms of land, I think about between 2 and 5% of people below the age of 35 own land. And these are people who would like to be part of the conversation, part of the productive systems. So the real question that we're asking, as I said, is this a mirage or is it a reality? And I'd like to start with you, Tim. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hassan. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim Mwangi. I work with Practical Action. I'm based out of Nairobi as the head of programs there. Thank you for the question. I mean, is it a mirage or are we getting real? I can say both. From where I sit, I've been attending AGRF for several years. I was young, and I'm no longer young. But the debate was more on young people, and I'm happy where we are right now. I mean, there are developments that have been made, but at the same time, there are questions and gaps that we need to fill. I mean, the statistics are talking, are really clear, and they're talking to themselves, and also to us. A bulging population, a youth that have energy to participate in agriculture, policies, enabling policies that have already been instituted by different governments that I've worked with. At the same time, investment opportunities even for the young people. The debate on inclusion is important. I mean, 10 years down the line, we are still talking about it. But yes, we'll continue with this debate. But for me, it's just a balancing act. Yes, we're supposed to be proud of the strides that we have made, but at the same time, the new gaps that are coming and still the existing gaps needs to be addressed so that we can have youth and women participating in agriculture. Our approach at Practical Action is basically looking at those two things. We believe that markets should work for young people and women, and we'll be talking more about this as we continue sharing the panel. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Tim. I mean, yeah, a bit of both. We really wanted to hear where you really stand as Tim the expert and Tim Practical Action. But we'll take that for now. We heard here that there's a lack of talent in the sector. I also looked up a few statistics, and I found that out of 100% enrollment, or 84% of those that are enrolled at primary school, only 12% of the youth graduate at tertiary. So that's quite concerning if we want to have those people to be the skilled people in this sector. So I'll ask Wangari, is this a reality? Is this mirage?
Thank you so much. My name is Wangari Kuria. I am the CEO of Farm on Fair, an organization based in Kenya but serves the entire continent on building capacities of young farmers and female farmers. Towards your question is, first of all, I am a real beneficiary of the African Changemakers, this cohort, so yay. Yes, and building capacity, which is in relation to your question. I want to just add a nuance to your question in that it's good to have basic education. It's good to have those documents. I am a master's holder from USIU Africa. But I find that, yes, going through that system really opened up my mind. But you still find a lot of headlines about how agriculture has failed people, about how running a business has failed because they didn't have the technical know-how. So I would twist your question towards more than just the basic learning, but specifically on how to run a business, how to perform financial management skills, how to even know how to farm, because in Africa, that's the challenge we have. We think just because we come from farmer community, it's in our blood. Inherently, I know how to farm goats. And then you don't separate your flock for breeding, so they interbreed, and then you have a superior, you have an inferior breed for the market, and then you end up struggling and suffering and saying, oh, this is a scam, farming is not the solution. Yeah, so that's how I would take on that.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure whether that's a yay or a nay. But I'll come back to you on that. Ruth,
Ruth from Gain. Over to you. What are we doing here? Are we youth washing? In climate change, we call it greenwashing. Are we youth washing, or are we actually working towards this inclusion?
Thank you very much. I think you've done the introduction. Ruth from Gain, that is where I am, working in Gain, Kenya. Yeah, it is a situation that we all know we are still grappling with. On one hand, we know that local governments have really gone into policy instruments and even legislation to set up a framework and an enabling environment for youth and women to get involved. We've seen certain governments even going a step further to allocate budgets that would propel the work of women in agriculture and food systems. But we also know that, to a large extent, those policies, often than not, do not work or are not properly coordinated, and therefore there are inherent gaps in those policies. We also know that the budgetary allocation, for my government colleagues here, nothing against you, it's meant to tick the box because they are often very minimal to an extent that you cannot achieve tangible, or not tangible could be strong, but long-lasting results. So I would say, yes, the policy space has been set. The enabling environment we continuously see, although there are still issues, like as being said, an issue of land ownership. In many of African countries, that is a big challenge. It's more cultural, and we look at the patriarchal system of government. But certain aspects have been made in other countries that would give us an environment for that. And I would say, as again, we've been able to support in the inclusion of women and youth. I would give an example of our Sun Business Network, Scaling Up Nutrition Network, which we've intentionally involved women in those businesses. We've intentionally involved youth in our approach. We've intentionally supported them in different ways. And as been said, one of the key challenges that the youth and women have is access to credit, also the technical support that they require. Many a times there are also issues of governance and also access to markets. I think, again, we've managed, we've tried through our Sun Business Network to see how we can support women in that space. And I said, we map out women-led SMEs that are in the food system and see the needs and try and see how do we support them, be it technically, be it in terms of grants, but also networking, looping them to other possible investors. We make them investor ready, looping them to other possible investors. And I'm sure even in this meeting, at some point in the week, we have a couple of our SMEs led by women that will be in a deal room with some of the investors. Thanks. Let me stop there, Hassan.
Thank you so much. We hear a lot of efforts individual organizations are putting into this particular agenda. But we still have gaps. Many years down the line, this is still a conversation. We still don't have the skills. We still don't have the skills from, at the basic level we heard from Wangari. Let me throw this now to Rebecca. What's your take on this subject?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. As you've heard, my name is Rebecca. I'm Hoye. I work with Micro Enterprises Support Program Trust. And on advancing social inclusion within food systems is actually both a pressing necessity and a complex challenge. Whether it becomes a reality or a mirage depends on the commitments of each one of us. And I guess, given that you're in this room, it means that we are both progressing the agenda of advancing inclusion in the food systems. Just speaking on how we get involved in this, I think the previous speakers have spoken around institutional capacity development on ensuring that inclusion is actually embedded in the structures of any organization. Unless that is done, I don't think we can do much in being intentional when it comes to advancing inclusion of women and youth in what we do. It all starts with the strategies that we develop at an organizational level, the strategic plan. How intentional are those strategies in relation to inclusion of women and youth. It comes down to the implementation. And of course, the previous speakers have also spoken around our overemphasis on inclusion at production level. How well are we able to look across the complete value chain to identify the gaps and see how well or how best we can be able to include women and youth in everything that we do in the various value chains that we work in. And therefore, as Micro Enterprise Support Program Trust, in progressing business development services and financial inclusion for smallholder farmers, we have made it very intentional to ensure that women are directly targeted, young people are directly targeted, to make sure that they're able to access the various support systems that they require to build and grow their businesses. And we have worked with various financial institutions to ensure that those financial institutions have developed financial products that can be able to directly impact on women and youth. And it must be as intentional as possible. Looking at the whole enabling environment, yes, we can talk about the enabling, the largest space in terms of the ecosystem in which we work in terms of policy framework and acts and laws. But what policies and frameworks do exist within our individual organizations that promote inclusion of women and youth in everything that we do, including the staffing of our own, staff in relation to what roles women or youth or men take in the respective organizations that we work in. So yes, I can say we have been beneficiaries of the institutional strengthening mechanism that Ignite has been implementing through Tanager. And through the diagnostics process, we were able to really identify the gaps and see how best we could strengthen our own frameworks and systems and strategies to ensure that we are very intentional in advancing the agenda of inclusion of women and youth. So we will continue to share the experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Quite a lot of information on what's going on, what needs to be done. Still some questions I'm asking myself, whether we are actually working towards youth and gender inclusion in food systems. I'll come to our last panelist before I come to the audience to actually tell us whether we are getting real or we're just talking to ourselves. So please introduce yourself, and then what's your take on this subject?
Yeah, my name is Winnie Osula, and I am a gender expert at Tanager under the Ignite project. And I just want to start by saying that we really appreciate that the work we are doing at Ignite at Tanager is, making some inroads in ensuring that gender is integrated within our programs. Yeah, for me, from that perspective, the food system itself is within a context, and this context could be political, it could be social, it could be environmental, it could even be technological, and all these systems are anchored on institutions. And therefore, as Tanager, we are looking at institutions as a pathway of advancing the structures that promote people's values, people's voices, people's interests. But who are these people that we want to advance their interests, their values, and these ones are the youth, and these ones are the women. So if someone needs to stand up for them and ensure that their interests are heard, then we need to anchor these things on the institutions. And that is why we pride ourselves in advancing gender and nutrition integration through the institutions that we work with, through the institutions that are working within the agriculture sector. When it comes to asking whether this is a mirage or is it a reality, I think we are already making some inroads. And for Tanager, I think just hearing our name Ignite means that something is happening. Thank you.
Okay, so now we have finally someone who said it's happening. We are hitting the target. Someone said something about finance here, and I'd like to call in Wangari, who I have worked with in the past, to say something on financing, as I asked Jeremiah to pick up the mic and be ready to give this to someone on the audience for the next questions to the panelists. So Wangari, yes. Please.
So to answer your question is no, we are doing very poorly. On the ground is that I tested this theory. I'm at a level where my organization needs that extra injection of cash flow. So I went to a commercial bank and I asked for a loan. And you can imagine the havoc that I went through and eventually didn't even qualify for that loan. First thing is that I am female, they've already profiled me and put me in a corner, and now they're just taking me round in circles, and I need to give so much proof because I might not have the listed assets that they expect. And then eventually I found a bank that could be able to give me a loan, but then still I got higher than usual interest rates because I'm being penalized. They're trying to de-risk themselves. So one of the ways that we can approach that financial aspect is by de-risking the industry. And that also comes at a policy level where the government comes in and says, if you insure the farmers, then we will also reinsure you. And it's kind of complex, but it would be one of the approaches that we can look at. And then obviously, it's a cultural issue in terms of looking at how can women also get a chance to own property and acquire property, and having those deep conversations with the women at that level and explaining to them, like I was talking to a cooperative, a milk cooperative. The women are the ones who milk, they're the ones who deliver the milk, yet it's the husband who goes and collects that money at the end of the year, the dividends. And so it's also showing them that by you not speaking up, by you not having a voice in this conversation, you are putting more women at risk because as I was explaining, I am doing my third book, then it's talking about sex for work, where women have to be put in these positions to gain an opportunity to work. And so their daughters, these same women who are members of this milk cooperative, dairy cooperative, their daughters have to go through these challenges of sexual abuse to get work because their mothers refuse to put a disruption in the current system that only male committee members in that cooperative and those kinds of conversations.
Thank you so much, Wangari. I'd like to turn this over to the audience. I think there's someone with a microphone there. You've heard quite a number of points coming from the speakers. Are we getting real, or are we just talking? Please, from what your observations of the panels, please do give your observation and ask a question to any of them. Are we getting real? Yes, right here in the front. Please tell us who you are.
I'm Priska and I'm from GAIN. Now for me, sitting here as an African woman, and I liked what one of the previous panelists said, what does inclusion look like? So my question to us is, what should inclusion look like in Africa for us to truly say we have included the youth and the women? Finance, you talk about these brilliant strategies that you have. But I say to myself, okay, if all these brilliant strategies are there, we're in 2023, but when I go to my communities and I don't see significant change in terms of the lives of those communities, so who is it accessing? So for me, it's like, how are we going to measure result? I think we really need, as a continent, to reflect on what should inclusion look like for our youth, who are a significant part of our population. For us to truly say we have included them, let us ask ourselves, how are we going to measure that? What results are we going to define to say we're going to be truly inclusive? I think for me, there's been a lot of segregated efforts, but they're not really yielding impact that we need to be seeing. So yes, the intention is there, the goodwill is there, but is that enough? And towards what purpose? So I've not really, I've kind of directly, asked you this to reflect, but also for the others. For me, I really think that we need to take a step back and think more about what do we want to achieve? What should change look like? In the next AGRF, what should our change look like for us to truly say we have included women and youth? Thank you.
That's an interesting challenge for our AGRF Managing Director. We shall definitely tell him what you're asking. Let me take two more, and then we can ask the panel to respond.
Thank you.
There's one in the corner on my right, my left, and then we'll come to the center here.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Mary Karanu from Rural Outreach Africa, an NGO in Kenya. and also convener of the Right to Food Coalition. Thank you for our panelists for their submissions and making us think. And I was thinking, is it happening? On the same question, is it happening? And for me, I would look at what are the outcomes? What are some of the results we are seeing? Are our communities becoming healthier? Is there improved access to healthy food? And also policy direction that our government takes, in environment, fiscal policies, etc. And in all these answers, I say no, we are not making progress. Social inclusion is not happening. Aside from that, I would call on us to expand the frame a little bit from producers, but also think about consumers. There are those who depend on markets for food. And recently, even with the recent SOFI data, it says more and more people, fewer people are able to afford healthy food. And then also look at non-traditional producers, like indigenous people. They also need to be included. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me take one more here before I ask the panelists, and then I'll get back to you.
All right. Thank you. My name is Catherine from Tanager. And even as we think about food systems, the question that was going through my mind was, what inclusion are we doing through the system? Because, and I think I borrow a lot from Didi, what she said, manufacturing as part of just that processing in the system. So what are the things we actually need to do in the different parts of the system? And I'm reminded actually of something to do with the consumer. What does the consumer need? Who might be a youth? They need something convenient. They need something that is appealing to them, among others, when you think about the food environment. But when you think through the system, production, processing, distribution, enabling policy, what do we need to do to actually think about inclusion, both for the youth and the women? Will the strategies be different? Maybe I'm throwing it to all of you, whoever might be confident to answer.
Thank you,
that.
Catherine.
Thank you.
A couple of questions that have been raised. Let me start, my fine Winnie. Please respond to any of the questions.
Yeah, I would like to respond to the first question. What does inclusion really look like? I think if I'm asked such a question, what comes to my mind is, do the women and the youth that you're targeting currently, do they have a voice? Are they able to make choices? And are they able to make decisions over those choices? So until we reach that point, then we cannot really say that we've reached the inclusion stage, but we are on our journey there. What matters to me is, when we talk about our national plans, are we bringing them there to fill up the spaces, to fill up the numbers? Or when we come back to the next AGRF, we're going to say, we have included this number of women, this number of youth in our national action plans in the food system space, and they're actually being actively engaged and their voices are being heard. And they are also contributing to the decisions that are being made. So that way, I would say that would be the face of inclusion from my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Tim, let me come to you. I think you've been quiet for a while.
Thank you. So I'd like to take the question on what inclusion we are doing in the system. And I think this is where we take a systems approach. The private sector has a very big opportunity to take up these solutions that you're talking about, either on processing, on distribution, or even in manufacturing. And having worked with the private sector, their language is one, profit maximization. At the end of the day, they want to see the opportunities. Why are you bringing a platform for the youth to maybe perhaps distribute to them or work with them? Why are we bringing women to be financed by these financial institutions? It has to make a business sense. At the end of the day, instead of marketing agriculture, as just perhaps a science or an income-generating activity, it must be from a perspective where we're making a business sense or a market sense. So I believe more inclusion, even in that system, seeing the opportunities across the value chains, even for women and youth to participate. Because of these big challenges we're talking about, even land, we have not yet sorted out production. Because in Africa, production is actually declining. But if we sort out production, and of course look at the other opportunities along the value chains, then we are able to have an inclusion debate much more better, and also create that system within this system we're actually talking about. So maybe an example, at Practical Action, we are working with two big organizations. We are working with IKEA Foundation, and we're also working with MasterCard Foundation. And the inclusion debate here is to bring more young people into agriculture. And our approach is regenerative agriculture that works for the youth. The idea here is mainly to target 70% women to be in those opportunities that come with agriculture. But to realize, as you include young women and young men into agriculture, they have perception issues. First of all, I'm happy that this picture that we have put out here is for a young person. What you see in most of the collateral and marketing materials in different development organizations or even in private sector organizations, you'll see older people. So in terms of, first of all, breaking these perceptions and dealing with, empowering them, and of course, shift of the mindset that agriculture is no longer, making good money for us, we should market it as a business model. So I think integrating private sector and working with all the other partners that are actually there would have the inclusion debate be much more successful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, interesting work that you're doing there. Yeah. Any of the questions or observations have been made? Rebecca, can you please respond?
Thank you. I'll also just pick up on how does inclusion look like. For me, the first step in inclusion is, are they there? Are the women actively involved in the work that we are doing? Are they accruing benefit from what they are engaged in? For example, if it's in agriculture, in a certain value chain, for example, if it is production of beans, are they actively involved in the production, selling, and are they accruing benefit from that particular crop they're involved in? If it's in processing, if it's a business, for example, are we intentional in making sure that we are able to support both all men, women, and youth businesses to be able to create value from what they're doing and be able to even grow their businesses to a level whereby they can be able to provide employment opportunities for other young people, other women, or other people that are involved in the process. So for me, the first step is that intentional engagement of women, youth, across the targeted value chains that we all work in. So once they are in it, then what do we do to make sure that they're able to move from where they are at to a higher level? And I think that is what we work on in terms of supporting them with business development services, understanding their financial models, ensuring that they're able to meet other larger businesses and get exposed and access market for their commodities, how they can streamline their supply chain by getting better producers, better quality produce for what they're processing or what they're involved in. So I think for me, it all starts with inclusion, engagement. Are they there in the first place?
Thank you so much. Ruth, I'll come to you now, but I'll actually pose a direct question to you. We all struggle with the issue of scale in this sector. You heard from one of the audience who spoke about we are doing so many little pieces everywhere. Where are we going with this? I mean, do you have any response to that? What do we do to scale? Is there a model that we can follow? Are we really trying hard enough?
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, it is indeed that we are in our different silos and we do our little bit. Of course, it makes a difference to the communities that we work in. For example, those in food processing, production and value chain. They make a bit of change in those communities. However, we realize that what is really preventing the scale in many cases are the policy environments that are there, land ownership, and access to finances. For rural communities, I think those are very key. You realize that in many communities, land, first of all, has been segmented to a level that you cannot use it for commercial production or even having sufficient at homes. At some point, you also realize that, as has been said, that women don't own land in many of the African countries. Yet, you realize that women are the backbone of the agriculture in this continent. But they don't own the land, and therefore they don't have no right to even usage of what has been produced. But we also realize that access to finance is a big issue. So I think for us, we need to lobby different governments to really put aside a budget towards scaling up some of the things that have been tried and tested, and we know that they work. As I said, I like what Tanzania government has done, tripled or 4 times, quadrupled their agriculture budget. This would give them a space to really move in different directions and also bring on board more people, even youth, because youth needs a lot of financing. There should be different financing mechanism or models targeting women and youth, because their needs are unique. They are vulnerable in very many ways. They don't have collateral to take loans from commercial institutions. But government should be able to give them collateral in a way that they can access credit so that they can scale up or they can be involved in meaningful production at different levels. So really, I think it's a really good space for us to advocate for our different governments to see how we can change the various legislations in our countries to be more targeted towards women financing and even land ownership. I know, for example, I would say for Kenya that now women are allowed legally to own land and even inherit, what we call communal land. So such moves in the right direction. There's still a lot that needs to be done in the continent in that space. But I believe that we need to concert our efforts together. Let us work together and see how we can lobby the government, which is the biggest duty bearer and is actually the biggest financiers of nearly all that we do. Again, we need also to connect or link most of these SMEs to various investors. They are investors that are ready to finance this, but are they investor ready? What are we doing to make them investor ready so that when they're in a deal room, they'll definitely be picked for the next level? So I think, Hassan, some of those things need to step by step, but there's a lot that we need to do. There's a lot that we also need to lobby the various governments that we come from to see that the policy space, the budgeting environment is changed, is attractive, and is very cognizant of women and youth as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we all seem to know what the what is. We're struggling with the how in this particular topic. There was a question in the crowd. I'll come to you, Wangari, later. Yes, please.
Hi,
go ahead.
I'm Josie. I'm from Australia, and I'm actually a founder of a non-for-profit called Ability Agriculture, which actually focuses on the inclusion of people with disability in agriculture, which I understand is a completely broader conversation of inclusion. But I'm also a woman in agriculture and from a multi-generational family of farmers. I think the most surprising thing for me to hear today is that what is experienced here is nearly a very similar experience for women in Australia as well. We have a metric in Australian agriculture that it will be accessible to all by 2030. And our metric for meeting that is that there's gender parity, so 50-50. But statistics for us is that we actually have 50-50 already in farm workers. So a lot of females work in agriculture. But yet, as we go up the food chain, there's only 1% of Australian female CEOs for agricultural companies. And so I guess I wanted to ask if there's insights into what are the mechanisms or policies or quotas that might be happening here to ensure that women are also included in those higher up positions as well. Because I think that in itself is a really important thing as well. And I think for us, we have quotas in our top 100 companies in Australia, and I think there's great opportunity to look at quota systems into smallholder organisations and co-ops for women to be involved in those decisions as well. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, and thanks for coming all the way from Australia to AGRF. Wangari, you are a CEO, a young CEO. Maybe you could try and tackle that question on quotas and legislation towards balancing the numbers in the sector.
Yes, thank you so much. And also, when we talk about inclusivity, we forget about the disabled. Like in this venue, how many disabled people have you seen? And that tells us that they're not also well represented in all sectors, and we need to be more intentional with that. And not just think about women, youth, but there is another group that is out there, and try to be more intentional in doing that. And probably I'm in love with the tractor outside. I'd like to see a tractor that can be driven by someone who doesn't have all the physical limitations that others might have. So I'm looking forward to such conversations as well. On inclusivity, she's left, but she asked a question about how does that look like? Yes, so the first thing is numbers. We need more women representation. We need more women in positions of power. We need more women mentoring other women in that. And it starts by seeing them in positions and taking bold steps and then thinking, oh, I can also do that. So that's really important. Then number 2, we need more mamas from the men saying, boy child has been forgotten. We need that. That's one of the indicators to know we're in the right direction. We need more older farmers saying, this is my succession plan, and I'm building capacity to my younger staff, to my younger children to take on the reins very, very soon. We need that. Those are some of the indicators. We need more urban, rural migration. That will be a good indicator to show that, oh, people are making it big in the rural areas, so I don't need to move, or I need to move back home. Things are easier that way. So we need more incentives. We need to explain to everyone that only half, like 60% of the population is contributing to the GDP. If we have everyone, women included, making decisions, being on the table, doing those critical decisions on how to distribute wealth, how to distribute resources, then we will be a healthier nation, we will have better income as a nation, and everyone likes money. That's a good motivation.
Thank you so much, Wangari. On the issue of quotas, I mean, I've looked up some, I don't think I've seen anything in the food systems on quotas in law. What I've seen is in Kenya, where I live. I'm from Zambia, but I live in Kenya. In the parliamentary systems, we have the women rep. And I think the more we have people like that in parliament to make these decisions, possibly these laws will start coming up. Rwanda has got quite an impressive balance in women leaders. Hopefully we'll start getting laws filtering into the food system around balancing numbers as well. But interesting point you raise.
Listen, I could add to something on that. Yeah, the legislation in Kenya is not only about parliamentarians, but of all leadership positions that should not be more than 2/3 of one gender. So even in agriculture, where both gender, one should not be more than 2/3. And I think to a large extent, that is being implemented. It is actually in law. So failure to comply means that you're likely to face something if somebody follows keenly. But we've also seen that in organizations we have policies that really are pro inclusivity, that we, for example, do not discriminate against any gender or against any person in whatever form. So a bit of that, but I also believe that legislation is good, but really who is the implementer? If we don't really force and move forward and advocate for the implementation, I am telling you these will be documents in shelves and they'll lie there for years. So really we need to get up and see how do we pull these things out of the shelves and put the duty barrier to say that we need these policies implemented. There are actually lots of policies even in agriculture, but they're gathering dust somewhere. So we need to be sure that we as a civil society, we need to come back and say, we pushed this policy and we've seen some action from the government, or as civil society, we've taken this step to see how women can get better investors, women can get a better inclusion in leadership in our various countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've just been signaled. You saw the lights flicking. I think I have 2.5 minutes to finish off. So I'll ask the question. Tim,
yeah.
Is it a reality or are we missing it? Just one simple word. Yes or no?
Yes, it's a reality.
It's a reality.
Yeah.
And to you, next. Ruth, yes or no? Yes. And to my right, is it a yes?
It's a hard no.
It's a hard no. Interesting one. Winnie?
I would say it's a yes, but I think because most of us are having a different agenda when it comes to the kind of outcomes we want to see, then I think we need to start from what is it that we need to avoid. then we'll have a common agenda from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming to this debate. I think there's no right or wrong answer on this panel, but I would like to ask you, the audience, those who think we're actually going forward with it, hands up. We're moving forward. Are we hitting it or we are missing? Yeah. Those who think it's a mirage, we're just talking. Okay, so we're just talking. We're just talking. The crowd says that we're actually going in the right direction. With that, thank you so much for being such an attentive audience. We hope you've learned something. And until the next time we meet and have this debate,